treated that way. If you were sick and I thought there might be a bad tooth response, well, I wouldn't want to just go in and take your tooth. I want to make sure that that's really what's needed first. I'd take my hand, I'd make sure it's good and clean here. I'll stick these fingers in your mouth and pry around, see if anything's loose or tender. If it was, oftentimes a tooth key or tooth extractor here is what I would use. Works great on your molars, your side teeth. You just slide that hook over it, and when you turn, that puts an awful lot of pressure on that tooth so you can roll that tooth out. You see this butts up against the gum as you pull it out, and that screw comes out so you can reverse the side that your hook sits on.
Yeah, that's like one of them wrenches, isn't it?
It's pretty similar. It doesn't work very well on your front teeth though, and if it's a molar or side tooth that's just in really bad shape, they'll break apart under this pressure. So in either of those cases, I'd likely go to my goat's foot elevator here. It's called a goat's foot elevator because it's shaped a little bit like a goat's foot, but it can be used to pull, but most of the time what they would do is actually use this piece to go down into the socket, that hole the tooth sits in, and they'd actually lever that tooth up out of there. Now, a device that looks an awful lot like this is still in use today, but they have quit calling it a goat's foot elevator. Bloodletting was another big thing in the 18th century. And when we think of bloodletting today, we think about leeches. Well, leeches were used in the 18th century, but they weren't your best option for your armies on the move. First of all, leeches are messy, and you've got to keep them alive. You've got that delicate balance of trying to keep them hungry enough that they'll be able to do you any good, but keep them fed enough that they'll stay alive. To make it a little more complicated, in the 18th century, they did not think your North American leeches were very good eaters. They thought you needed to bring in those European leeches that would eat a lot more. So you had to keep those things alive, bringing them all across the ocean. So we generally would prefer a more mechanical means of bleeding, something like the lancet you see here, or the flame that you see here. And they had all kinds of different tools that they used for bleeding you. Now, you might wonder, why in the world would they want to bleed you? Well, they bled you for different reasons. One reason
they
they'd
used
like
to bleed you for, what was that, to kill George Washington?
Well, I'm sorry, what was that?
George Washington. What was he died of?
Well, that's argued a bit. Throat infection is what it was referred to.
Strep throat, yeah. Now, they used to bleed you for that. They'd cut you back.
Yes.
And they'd let you drink that blood to fill more blood.
Well, they'd bleed you for a lot of things.
Yeah, both eyes.
Well, in the 18th century, they oftentimes thought that if you had a fever, it's because you had too much blood. They thought your heart was always making more blood. So if you had a fever, well, you had too much blood running through your body, more so than those veins and arteries were designed to carry. And that caused friction, and the friction caused the fever. So you could drain a little bit of the blood to get rid of the friction, and that got rid of the fever. They thought you always had more blood being built by your heart. And they also thought that your average adult body could hold somewhere around 24 pints of blood, about twice what we'll usually have. So, they did sometimes take more blood than what a patient could safely give up. Another reason that they would sometimes bleed you is part of a belief that you had something bad in your blood, and that's what was making you sick. Well, we could drain that blood to make you better, to get the bad stuff out of you. And they also did preventative bleedings. I'm sure in most of our families we've had preventative cures that we do periodically.
Castor oil.
Absolutely. Purging and puking have still remained a pretty popular preventative cure for many families today. And they were in the 18th century. So these are a few of the reasons they would bleed you. And those are a few of the tools that they would use to bleed you. But I mentioned they thought the body had more blood, or had an ability to hold more blood than what it did. Many doctors of this period thought that you shouldn't overbleed a patient, but they also thought that you had a lot more blood in your body. So the more conservative doctors were still taking more blood, oftentimes, than what you could safely give up. There were others who went to the far extreme on this, though. There were some that argued that if you're laying in bed and weren't up moving around and, doing things, you didn't really need blood anyway. I thought it wasn't important. What you needed was a breath and a pulse, but not blood. So those people would certainly take more blood than what you could safely give up. And those are just a few of the treatments. We also had medicinal treatments in the 18th century, some of which are still with us today, some of which are now known to be very toxic, like the mercury. Today we would not dream of handling mercury. We wouldn't rub it onto our bodies, we wouldn't swallow it, but they did all of these things in the 18th century. Purging and puking.
Just like coal, they'd take coal back then too.
Yes, sir. Well, mercury was used for a lot of things, but two of the ways it was used was to purge you or to puke you, to make you go to the bathroom or to make you vomit. Because if you're sick, we need to stimulate that central nervous system. Puking you or purging you will do that. They'll also get the bad stuff in you and bring it right out. Of course, looking back from today's point of view, we realized what we were putting in the body was certainly worse than what we're taking out. But 250 years ago, they did not realize that. And you could swallow a tiny drop of mercury, and it would make you go to the bathroom with great attention to detail. You probably wouldn't go anywhere else that day. You could swallow a slightly larger dose, but still a pretty small drop. It would continue to make you go to the bathroom, but then it would also have that added benefit of making you vomit at the very same time. Now, you talk about fine medicine, that's a multitasking medicinal there. They would sometimes rub it onto the bodies too. Don't mind, dear, stay off the ladder, please. Thank you. We've never let y'all on the ladder in all the years you've been coming out. That's no great shock to you, honey. The mercury would be rubbed onto the body too in treatment of some social diseases. It's probably best not mentioned. But they realized that it had an effect upon the body. What they didn't recognize was the long-term effect on the body. It seemed to do some wonderful things. And it wasn't until years of using this till we started to realize that it was causing lots of problems. Don't mind, buddy, don't lean too hard on the table. It's not bolted down and it will slide with you. Thank you.
But mercury, that there ginger, what do you use that for?
For your stomach.
I take that ginger now so you get out of the earth stores.
It would be used in many of the same ways it's used in home remedies today. Now, I mentioned the purgings and the puking. I probably should mention the beds back behind you. You may have noticed that each of those has a hole in it, and beneath each hole is a comfort pot.
That's a soup bed.
Yes, sir, sure is. And those are pretty important because if you were in this hospital, this infirmary, you were sick or you were hurt, there's a pretty good chance that you might not be able to get up out of your bed, but you still had to use the bathroom. And those comfort pots were a way to keep a pretty clean environment, but allow you to go to the bathroom even when you couldn't get up and move about. Let's see, if you were shot, generally one of the first things I'd do is take this bare finger and run it into the wound to see if I could feel that musket ball. If we could not feel the musket ball, many believed, in fact most believed, we should leave it alone. We shouldn't go in and try to remove it if we can't feel it with that bare finger because it's too deep and will cause too much damage. But not everyone believed that. Some thought you ought to take a probe and find it no matter how deep it was. That creates a problem. That probe's certainly longer than my finger, but it's also longer than this small pair of forceps, which is the main tool used to remove a musket ball. And we can make a larger pair of forceps that would go in deeper. It could certainly reach that musket ball.
She was tearing open trying to get a hold of it.
Exactly. The problem with this is imagine all the damage it would do as it reaches deeper into an already wounded body. So that's not in anyone's best interest. Fortunately, there was another tool, the ball puller or ball extractor, that can be placed into the wound, and you turn this handle. As you do, watch what happens to the screw or bayonet out here on the end. It goes in deeper and deeper. Well, that's steel, and steel's an awful lot harder than the lead musket ball would be. So it digs into that softer ball, and you can pull the whole thing out. This actually remained in use as late as the early 1900s. It looks like this would just push the ball back further through. When you think about it, that musket ball stopped. Something has stopped it in your body. It's met resistance. It's also flattened out considerably from the impact. And you don't have to get this in very deep into the lead to have a good bite that you can pull out. So this actually was a pretty useful implement.
I'll just stop this real quick.
Yes, sir.
And then start off.